came here, they actually came to Adairsville, really. Of course, that's the way the roads and stuff was basically coming that way. So, but they actually stopped along about a small creek, which that creek still exists, but it's right where the old Uskaloga church used to be. If people know, right up on 41 going north, right above Adairsville, you can see the Uskaloga church. But when they built that present Uskaloga church, it's just across the road from the old church used to be. And actually, according to Daniel Mosteller's Bible, they had two children that died while they were right there at the Uskaloga area, and they're actually buried in the old church site itself. But that actually came out of the Mosteller's Bible. Of course, I wouldn't mind seeing that Bible.
Oh, yeah.
You know, if anybody in the family's listened to this and might know where Daniel's Bible is, I wouldn't mind taking a look at it or whatever, just for curiosity, and see if there's anything else in it. Now, one thing too, Daniel, of course, they were, that's kind of a small area, so they were actually looking for more land and whatever. And he had been in contact with this guy named William Blaylock. William Blaylock had quite a bit of land and whatever, but one particular thing that caught Daniel and them's eye was he had a tract of land, which is about really Mosteller, the spring, we call it the spring at Mosteller, that actually provided the water source for that property. It's really about 5 miles out on 41 off of 75, if anybody's interested to know where this area is located. Of course, now one thing about this, folks, this is that Mosteller property now that I'm talking about is private property.
That's right, and we do respect private property.
And you don't want to be going out there, well, I call it nosing around or whatever. But it's very important because, as far as I know, there's no one living on that property, but I'm sure they've got people that's caretakers or whatever around.
There is a house. Yeah, there is a house on past the mill out that road. So there is somebody living there, and I'm sure they're keeping an eye on the place because of vandalism, and they don't want it destroyed. And
that has happened. It's because when I actually did some work and first got familiar, of course I've known for many years about the Mosteller mill. And then when I actually moved back to Bartow County area and whatever, I was just curious to know about some of these things. And, Mosteller Mill was, still around and whatever. And I actually stopped there and talked to some people and went in the house. And, they invited me in the house. And also the guy let me go in the mill and look, although the mill was not functioning anymore. But it was a pretty nice place. But getting back to Daniel, he actually worked out a deal and he purchased this spring area, from this William Blaylock. Now Jacob, Daniel's brother, actually, he was doing the same thing because he had, as I said, he came with these two brothers did. So Jacob actually wound up buying some property. Now I don't know who he purchased his property, where it was still from Blaylock, this William Blaylock or not, but he was actually about 2 miles north on another creek area. He didn't have a spring like what Daniel's got, but he was on a pretty decent stream, I understand. And then, of course, both of these families actually, started doing their thing. They built cabins and whatever off of timber and stuff that's on that property, and then whatever. So they were doing their thing. So we talked about some of these people too. Oh well, some of the families actually that was. They may have migrated at the same time. They may have been friends or whatever with the Mostellers. Now, one thing about this, where Mosteller's is, the nearest little community there, which still exists to this day, that's Folsom.
Yes.
If anybody wants to know where Folsom is, it's just right the other side of where the grist mill is, and you just turn off the road there off of Highway 140 to the left, and you can go into downtown Folsom. Of course, don't blink your eyes too much.
Such that it is.
Right. But now, some of these families that was actually there the Blaylocks were Scotts, Edwards, Murphy, Hicks, Penson, Littlefields, Gore, Floyds, and of course, now Floyd is that's a very old name there, and of course, that's the family that is another, I guess you call him the infamous person of that family. That's Pretty Boy Floyd, the gangster.
Right.
But that's his people.
Yeah.
It's in the Folsom area.
And I believe the Edwards were was kin to some of the Mostellers.
That is correct. And you also had the Gaines, the Ellis, Adcox, Hayes, and then there were some other families too. So they was quite a bit of thing. Now, one thing about this, Jacob and Daniel both actually built grist mills, small grist mills and stuff, about doing stuff. And also, now, Daniel, at that particular time, he built a pretty decent sized sawmill, and of course he's using his own timber, but he provided a lot of lumber and sashes and stuff like that people used to build their houses there in Folsom. So he was a wheeler and dealer.
Right.
Now, one thing too, like in the 1840 census, both Daniel and Jacob, and then when they came here, I'm sure when they came from South Carolina, that family, they did have slaves. Not to mount anything. I mean, because that wasn't the kind of, they weren't huge farmers and whatever, so they didn't need large number of slaves. So these people probably just normal workers or whatever. But one thing about it, by the 1850 census, both Daniel and Jacob was out of the slave business. And they actually sold their slaves to a Daniel Mosteller, who was an uncle.
Okay.
Their uncles. But this Daniel, he was also a millwright. That's what he did too. So I guess he needed the help or whatever. So they got out of slave business because they didn't really need them, because they were having kids, and especially Jacob. Jacob had quite a number of children. He actually had more than what Daniel had.
So instead of working the farm, they worked the mill.
Yeah, they worked in the mills and the saw mills, and they had the wool carding mills.
Right.
And what else? So they were doing a lot of stuff there, and
it's good to keep it in the family.
Yeah, and they were actually also they did buggy work and wagon things, and they also had distilleries too. They made Little Moon, I guess. It's like
looks like everybody else.
Yeah, just like everybody else is doing. But you had to have that stuff for medicinal purposes only, I guess. So they were doing their thing. In 1855, Daniel actually died. Now Daniel, he's the one that's the Mosteller Mill person at the spring. Now Jacob was the one that his brother lived a couple of miles up, and when he actually died, his son Berryman, and it's spelled Berryman, Berryman Mosteller, inherited the property. I'm sure with Daniel's wife, who was still alive or whatever, and then of course they were girls too and whatever. But Berryman being the oldest boy and whatever, he wound up inheriting this. And it wasn't a long time till he had already enlarged this piece of property that they had to about 800 acres. So he was a decent landowner there. And of course Jacob, his brother, was pretty prosperous too. And had a large family, but he didn't have the land and stuff either. But as if this wasn't farming land and stuff. Really, there's a lot of rocks and stuff around there. You can see it, how rocky that whole area is, and that's probably one reason for the spring and stuff. And I've heard words about it that big spring is more like an artesian whatever, and an artesian well, it'll look like an underground heavy stream or river, because it's more than just like a little bubbly spring. That sucker, it is big. I mean, I've watched it, and the water just boils out of the ground.
Huh.
So, and it's still there to this day. You can still see it. One thing also, I want to talk a little bit about the Mosteller house.
Who built it? Did they build it themselves?
Okay,
or?
The original house that Daniel built was a log house, and then as they had children and whatever, they kind of expanded this log house and whatever. And and of course I said it was added on to a little bit and whatever. But one thing that Daniel had promised his wife, that one day that he'd build her a real nice house and whatever. And then of course in 1852, that's when he did. He went to work and built them a nice house. They are, believe it or not, some bricks in this house. It's in the chimney and whatever, and they know exactly when this was done was in 1852, because that's when the bricks were molded to build this house. And of course the house, if you do see the house or see pictures of it, if you look at Vicky's website, you can see the pictures of the house, and it's built in what we call the 1850s style.
Well, I don't have them. I don't have all the photos.
Okay.
Vicky Bostwick is a descendant of the Mostellers.
Right.
And her sister Kim Baldridge, and Kim contacted me first when she found out I told her was doing the show, and so Vicky had a lot of the photos that I'm posting on the Facebook page.
Right.
And she contacted me, and great girls. Talked to both of them. Very nice ladies. And Vicky has sent us a lot of photos, and we're posting those on the Facebook page tonight, or as many of them as we can. And then on our website, we will be doing a whole page on the Mostellers, and all the stuff that she's sending me will go on there, and everything that we had already.
That's great. But y'all do please look at it. Give Vicky a little time to get it on there, because I've already saw some of these photos, and they're wonderful. They're amazing. So y'all do take a look at her.
Great history. Great history. I appreciate them very much for doing this for us.
Right. Now this house, when you look at it, believe it or not, this house is a two-story house. I mean, it's kind of hard to tell that's what it is, but it is a two-story house. It actually has two large rooms upstairs with a hallway in between these when you go up the stairs and whatever. The ground floor actually has two large rooms, and it has a parlor and a kind of a hallway in it. Of course, I understand that the kitchen originally was a separate building in the rear, just like most of the early homes, and the reason being is because they didn't want to have fires and stuff, and a lot of times doing the cooking and stuff could cause fires, and so the actual kitchen was in the rear of the house. But later on in the years, they added the kitchen to the house, and they added indoor, the bathrooms and stuff like that. Now, one thing about this house that Daniel did, this thing believe it or not, had a plumbing system in it, a very early plumbing system.
And this was back late 1800s or mid?
No, this is prior to the Civil War. He had a plumbing system in it, and the way this plumbing system worked, it had a large tank in the back of the house, and it really worked on like a hydraulic pumping system driven by water that pumped into this big tank, and they had indoor running water in this house. So that's kind of a peculiar thing, because there wasn't a lot of houses had indoor plumbing at that time.
Yeah,
so,
but
it
true.
did. They said it was a kind of a simple system, but it worked. So.
Right.
And of course, as I had the house to this day is still standing. I mean,
sure is. Yeah.
It looks like one of the older homes, and
you walk up to the porch, and it's like you're walking back in time.
Yeah, right. And one thing about this house, it's because there are still some houses around Bartow County that's old, the old brick homes and stuff. It goes prior to the war and whatever. So this house has been well taken care of. About the grist mill itself. Now, Daniel, Berryman's daddy, when they first came here, and then acquired that property out there, one of the things he did, naturally, is build him a house and stuff to stay in, and I'm sure maybe a small barn or something to take care of animals. But he also built a small grist mill. I can't find much information on the original mill itself, but it was a functioning mill, for that area. And of course, just like his brother, both of them had these small grist mills. Now, when Berryman in 1858, Berryman set out to really make this a big deal, so he wound up building a very large grist mill there, and this thing wound up, it's really 3 stories. When you see this grist mill, I mean, you see Jesus. It's something else, because a lot of grist mills you see is just maybe a 2-story thing, because a lot of time the way the milling and stuff is, all things are pumped to upper floor and then come down through a grinder and whatever when you grind your meal or flour. But anyhow, this was a 3-story building. There's still a cornerstone, engraved cornerstone in this building. The actual foundation and stuff, and the people that built this grist mill was a K.M. and F.F. Dillback. I don't know too much about the Dillbacks, or where these people were just hired to come in there, because I couldn't find any records of them. It was somebody living in that area, so they must have been somebody that came here and did this. I'm not real sure. Now, one thing about this, the mill itself, of course, back then, because metal was not readily available in a lot of things, most of the gears and stuff would actually be by wooden cogs. It was water treated hardened wood and whatever, and then of course later years, naturally it did, the gears would change to steel. But now you can still see some of the old wooden gears, because they're still in that building, so you can tell what they look like. This mill had a 14-foot water wheel, a wooden overshot water wheel, meaning the water went across the top to drive this water wheel. And then, of course, later on, in later years, the thing was changed to metal. And, because wood, I'm sure they had to keep repairing the
right.
wooden one, so whatever. So
as the technology come available, they went with...
Right. And the mill actually operated, by some of the Mosteller people, whatever. I think the Gaines and whatever, I don't know the relationship or whatever, but genealogy-wise, but the Gaines people actually operated this. And matter of fact, one of the Gaines people, when I went into the mill, I saw one of the Gaines people there. I can't remember the man's name, but he actually lived in Adairsville, whatever, when I saw him. So, and as I said, the mill still stands there today. But now, the rooms of the old sawmill and the wool carding factory and the distillery, all that stuff is now gone. There's actually was an old building there that originally was built, and it was a huge log building, which is a slave quarters. I mean, these actual pictures exist of that. But
now later, that's the one that's close to the road.
Right, and later on it was used for something else, because it sure wasn't a slave type building.
I believe one of these photos that I just put up on the Facebook page, and we'll be putting it on the website, is taken in front of. It looks like it's taken in front of that small home there.
And I think they do refer to it. Some of the old photographs and stuff mention something about it was a slave cabin, and I'm sure it probably originally was, but it sure wasn't used for that. It was used for other things, because these people, by the Civil War time, they didn't have any slaves. I'm going to talk about the Civil War some. Of course, us Southerners, I don't like the word Civil War, because there sure wasn't nothing civil about it.
That's right.
It's a war between the states, or
yes,
a war for Southern independence, or whatever the Southerners really want to call it. So you can just bear with me, whatever. But anyhow, in May 1864, the Civil War actually came, or war between the states actually came to the area. And when I say area, I'm talking about all over, really, Cass County and whatever, and then Floyd County and these counties moving south. Actually, when the Union Army appeared at Mosteller Mill, what this was, General Schofield, he was what you call the left line of march coming from, and they actually, when they left Resaca and Gordon County heading south, the armies, because they were so large, were really split in three pieces. One of them actually, I think that was General McPherson, that army corps went from like Calhoun down to Old Rome Road towards Rome. General Sherman and others, they actually, and Thomas, General Thomas and those groups, were actually headed toward Adairsville. And because of the way the roads were, then General Schofield actually came down what you call the old Cache Road, coming down from the other side of Gordon County. If you're familiar with any of that area up there, crosses over Highway 53 and whatever at the Snorville area, downtown Snorville.
About halfway between Fairmount and
the road just comes right on past Snorville, the little community of Snorville, right towards Folsom. And then, of course, right there they were, the biggest good camping area for whatever. But now, this Union Army said it had over 13,000 troops. It's a pretty good size, and that didn't include the cavalry. But these things, they also was transporting 28 cannons, so you can, it takes 6 and 8 horses to pull cannons, so you can see how big an operation this was.
Right.
And believe it or not, it was one of the smaller of these three armies. So you can see how massive General Sherman's whole armies were, these army corps. They actually, the road that actually comes on down that way, the very first thing they did is came right by Jacob Mosteller's farm. And they kind of tore that place up pretty bad. Pretty well stole it. Well, I don't know whether you call it stole or not. They just went ahead and borrowed everything, so whatever.
That's what it was called a lot back then.
Yeah, they called it foraging, but they pretty well did a lot of destruction to this, and and I'll talk about that just a little bit later, or whatever. But anyhow, they actually came on to the Mosteller Mill area to do their camp, and one thing about it, the records say that General Schofield, he actually stayed in the mill. He didn't stay in the house. A number of his generals and whatever stayed in the house itself. I guess they run the people out or made them get in other rooms, and they just did their thing. But anyhow, General Schofield stayed in the mill. That was his headquarters. He stayed there. But now the Union Army was only there about really even less than 24 hours. Because as I said, they were doing nothing but the whole idea of these armies, the way these armies was moving, they were looking for a place to trap the Confederate Army. General Joseph Johnston's Confederate Army. So that's what this whole deal was, is kind of flanking operations. And once they thought that they could, because they had a pretty good sized little battle around Adairsville, with that Octagon House, the Saxton House, and whatever. So the whole deal was maybe to trap the Confederate Army, but that's why they did it. So they actually left Mosteller Mill about 24 hours later and whatever, and then headed on towards Adairsville.
So there was never any kind of skirmish around Mosteller's Mill. No. That's probably a good thing, because that's why it's probably still standing.
Oh yeah, they did their thing, and as I said, because this family, did not have slaves and whatever, so, I really don't know, what went on. The records, and I'm gonna get into this just a little bit. It don't say too much about the men. I don't know where Berryman was. A lot of times the men had to get out of Dodge, and if they didn't get out of there pretty quick, a lot of times they would arrest them and consider them sympathizers and whatever. So, because Berryman, now Jacob, his brother, he actually had sons in the Confederate Army, and that may be why that they did the devastation to his area, but Berryman didn't. He didn't have that situation and whatever, but it don't say where Berryman was at when this was going on. It just mentions the ladies. So, one thing I do want to tell you some things now. It's kind of, some of this stuff is kind of halfway funny, but whatever. It's, I guess you can call it the ingenuity or whatever you want to call it with the women. What they did. they did a number of things there. Whatever one of their things that they did is they actually took food and went out into Mosteller's graveyard, which is up behind the house up there, and they actually
buried the food.
Yeah, well, they actually put the food in graves. Okay, and then what they did, they actually dug up some of these people in there. I don't know about Daniel's grave, it don't say, but they actually took up some of these bodies, put food underneath it, and then put the casket back on top, and then covered it back up.
Well, that was smart. I mean, it was that.
But see, now, understand that the Union Army was already slick about some of this stuff. You know, they already know, because one of the favorite habits of Confederate people did, and that's another story for another day, but they run into it, I think, in Tennessee and whatever. They had a habit of putting all their valuables in the ground in graves. Well, the Union Army, finally, they turn around, they'd dig them up to see what's in it. But once they run into it, actually a body and a casket and whatever, they didn't fool with that anymore. So I guess whatever food they had in there pretty well was left alone. Another thing they did is a bunch of hams and stuff. The ladies actually took the boards over the porch of this house, and as I said, if you look at a picture of the house, when Vicky gets it on there, you can see see the porch. Well, above the porch, okay, they took the slats and stuff down, and they hid hams and stuff and cured meat up in that lot, and then closed it back up.
You would think they could smell it.
Well, it hadn't been in there long enough to cause any problem, I guess, because they were only there, understand, about 24 hours or a little less, so they didn't really have time to mill around and do some things, whatever. And but one thing about it, they know this stuff to be a fact, because, believe it or not, this salt and stuff, and with the grease and stuff coming out of that, it actually leached into the wood. And they talk about it to this day. It's hard to get paint to even stick to those boards above that porch because of that grease.
Right.
Of course, I guess it wouldn't really, it kind of surprised me. At one time, they might not have tore all them boards out and replaced them, but they never did. And they say you can still see that stained stuff to this day on those porches.
Well, that's a piece of history in itself, right there.
Oh yeah.
They need to leave the boards.
Another thing they did is they had a bunch of meat that was stored in their out in their smokehouses and whatever. So, actually what they did, these ladies, and how they got this idea, I don't know, but, and this come from some of the families, the way they talked about this stuff, they said that these women actually coated these meat and stuff they had hanging up in a tar-like thing and kind of burnt the outside of it. And then hung it back in the smokehouse. Well, when the Union Army there doing their forging trick, whatever, they run across this stuff. By that time, it kind of smelled off the wall and whatever.
And they thought it was bad.
Well, the ladies told them, said, go ahead. Y'all need to take all this meat. You can do what you want to with it. Well, I mean, these people, they said, well, whatever. And they want to know, and the ladies kind of insinuated, well, you better be careful, though. This stuff is, I'm afraid, it's all spoiled and ain't no good.
Sounded like they were some very smart women.
Oh, they pulled a slick job on them, whatever. And these guys, and matter of fact, how they know some of this stuff is halfway true. There is a documented letter that a soldier wrote shortly after being up there. He actually wrote home to his wife and actually mentioned it about at this spring where they stayed, and he mentioned about Mosteller's, but I think he misspelled the name. But anyhow, they know it's Mosteller's where these people were at, and he mentioned in his letter that about these Southern Belles trying to poison them with bad meat. So I reckon I don't know. I mean, how many times they run across this stuff, but anyhow, they played the trick on them. And another thing they did too is the silverware and stuff that they had in the house, and I don't know where they buried some of it, whatever, but some of the silverware and stuff like that, they were worse at it. They actually took this silverware and coated it somehow with arsenic, and it turned silver black, and it looked like I guess some of these soldiers thought this stuff wasn't nothing but old tin wire and whatever, and they didn't think it was no good, so they just discarded it. They didn't care nothing about that stuff.
So they didn't want to steal it.
No, they didn't steal it. They didn't want to steal old tin.
Worth stealing.
They didn't need the tin wire. It's junk to them, so they didn't steal. They didn't steal their wire either. Destruction really did as hard as it did Jacob, his area. They made it through the war okay, and they were able to survive okay. Now Jacob Mosteller, as I said, they got devastated pretty bad, and by the time the 1870s, they pulled up lock, stock, and shebang with all the kids and all outside of the ones that was still married and whatever. But the majority of that family, they moved to Texas, so they just left here.
Right.
And some of Berryman's people eventually left and moved on to Florida. So there's not too many of them around, but
Right.
but they still a bunch of cousins and all that stuff still around.
Right. And Vicki and Kim,
Yep.
that sent us the photos,
Yeah.
they're still around, and they still remember, and I think that's fantastic that they're ancestors of the Mostellers, and they're so into this history.
Oh yeah,
You
I
know,
mean it's just a fascinating place
It is.
and whatever, and I mean to me I wish somebody could that had the money or whatever go back, and to me it would be a fair tourist attraction, I guess, or
Yes.
whatever to or something, but
Yeah, I'm sure people are curious and want to see it, and
Oh, yeah.
I know I'm dying to. I've not been in the mill, but would like to see it.
oh yeah.
It would be nice, but I don't know that I don't think he's interested in selling it, but I think some of the family members have tried to purchase it back.
Well, yeah.
I believe it was sold out of the family in the 30s, the 1930s.
Yes, that's what I understand. They say that there was the people that actually owned it were some type of relation to the Mostellers going way back, but I don't know that to be a fact.
Right.
Vicki, I guess that's what her was named, the girls in
Vicki,
Statesboro. She did mention to me yesterday when I was talking to her on the phone that they did try to rebuy that property,
Right,
or
right.
or
That's
maybe
what
her
she-
mother and them tried to get their hands on it.
Somebody in the family tried to purchase it back.
And but they
No,
said no.
they'll never get it. It's.
I understand.
I
it.
do too. If I had it, I wouldn't want to let it go either. I mean, so.
Well,
it's a
from
beautiful
what
place.
Vicki told me is that they kind of offered them a premium price,
Right.
and the people just
Right.
wasn't interested.
Yeah.
They wasn't interested. Now, I don't know how much land that's involved there now, so just remember, if you ever do go out there, remember that's private property, folks, and
That's
be
right.
careful.
That's right.
And you can take pictures. You can see the house
You can
and
see
the
it
mill
from
from the road.
That's right. You take a, and that's I put a photo on tonight from the road. But yeah, respect other people's property.
Oh, yeah.
Please. Bob, I appreciate it.
Thank you again, Vicki.
Once again, Vicki Bostwick and Kim Baldridge, thank you so much for the photos.